One of the biggest misunderstandings in doodle breeding is the idea that adult size is an exact number. It isn't. And when breeders pretend that it is, that's where, the confusion and the disappointment usually start. So families often ask about size because, they're trying to plan their lives. They want to know what they're committing to, and that is completely reasonable. The problem is that the way size is often talked about creates a false sense of certainty instead of clarity. So, here's the truth about predicting the final adult size of a puppy. There is no such thing as an exact adult weight for a puppy. What responsible breeders work with, though, is a size window and not a guarantee. Marketing labels like mini or petite or teacup or medium or standard, they can sound reassuring, but they don't actually explain how size is predicted. They simplify something that's more nuanced than most people are told. There are industry-defined, ranges for weight. For example, what's often called a mini typically falls in the mid 20 to 30 pound range, while smaller dogs under that are sometimes referred to as teacup, and larger dogs fall into medium or standard categories. Where confusion creeps in is that people use those labels differently. And what families actually care about isn't the category necessarily, but how big does the dog feel in daily life? So that's why, we don't lead with size labels. We focus on realistic size windows and what those dogs actually look like living with families day to day. Ethical breeding isn't about making promises that feel good in the moment. It's about being honest about probability so families can make, good, informed decisions. If you really want to know how big a puppy will get, here's the thing. You have to change how you think about size. When we think about size, we start with structure, not numbers. Parent size matters, yes, but not because it guarantees an outcome. Parent size matters because it anchors a realistic range. It anchors a size window. So now here's the thing. When both parents are genuinely small with consistent structure across their lines, we can narrow the size window, the weight window, significantly. That's not guessing. We call that intentional selection. Genetics, the misunderstanding, or one of the misunderstandings about genetics is they don't give us certainty, but they do give us guardrails. And those guardrails help us avoid size extremes and reduce unpredictability. But they don't override, biology or environment. So let's talk about what genetics cannot control. When it comes to predicting puppy size, genetics are only part of the whole story. So here's the whole story. Puppies, like people, don't grow in a vacuum. Nutrition matters. Activity matters. Overall environment matters. Two puppies from the same litter can mature differently depending on how all those factors play out. So that's why a breeder claiming that they can guarantee an exact adult weight is, essentially overselling control that we don't actually have. Responsible breeding means being clear about what we can influence and equally clear about what we can't influence. Let's walk through a common size scenario. So suppose a litter has a dam that weighs about 55 pounds and a sire that weighs about 10 pounds. When people see a larger mom paired with a smaller dad, it's natural to assume that the puppies will land somewhere in the middle in terms of their weight. And that assumption certainly makes sense. But here's the thing. Size doesn't actually work like simple math. Adult size isn't determined by averaging the numbers. It's influenced by structure, refinement, and how consistently those traits genetically are expressed across generations. So that's a fancy way of saying, in pairings like this, the sire's line carries a strong, consistent bias towards smaller adult size, while the dam, the bigger of the two, contributes a stable frame and overall structural consistency. So this combination allows us to narrow the expected range without pretending, there's an exact number. So for litters like this, a realistic expectation is that it's going to be a medium-sized dog or a mini, roughly 30 pounds to 38 pounds, right? That window. Not because we're averaging the parents, but because we're intentionally breeding toward a predictable outcome using the known genetic guardrails. And we just know when you're given realistic expectations, you're less anxious, right? You can plan better, and you'll be far more satisfied long term. We find, that problems usually don't come from dogs being too big or too small. Where problems come from is when the dog is mismatched to a family's expectations. So intentional breeding, well, listen, it's not about selling a fantasy. What it's really about is reducing uncertainty. So dogs end up in homes that truly fit them. And when, breeders are transparent about size windows instead of guarantees, well, then, everybody benefits. Families make better decisions, and dogs end up in appropriate homes. And trust, well, it stays intact. So that's how we think about size, but not as a number, but as a window.